University of Northampton Popular Music Podcast with me, Dr. Stace Constantinou, Senior Lecturer in Music at the University. This is part 2 of the podcast between myself and Mark Lawson. Mark, you've been a writer at The Guardian since 1995. You also write for The Independent, The Tablet, The New Statesman and Radio Times. You've been a series writer for the TV show Absolute Power, 2003, and you've written for the TV series Screenplay from 1986. You've starred in Ricky Gervais's Extras, and as a broadcaster, you've directed and presented Mark Lawson Talks for the BBC Radio 4 from 2003 to 2015. You also work as a broadcaster for foreign bodies, Radio 4, The Late Review and Newsnight. You were the main presenter for the flagship BBC Radio 4 arts programme Front Row between 1998 and 2014. You've interviewed many famous musicians, including Phil Collins, Tom Jones, Alice Cooper, Bob Geldof, Noel Gallagher, Brian Eno and Björk. And you've also interviewed the film director Ridley Scott. I believe you've interviewed or you've conducted over 3,500 interviews to date. Part 2 picks up where we left off, discussing the creative opportunities offered by imposing limitations.
Sometimes limitations are good. I mean, limitations of form. I mean, sonnets are a great example of this, where the fact that, if you want there to be a 15th and 16th line, then there can't be, because that's what you're writing. Rhyming couplets. I think they're very exciting, some of those limitations. But then the controversial one is political limitations on what you can and can't say. But, I mean, Terence Rattigan, great playwright, still performed. There's a show called Separate Tables that is touring and at the moment, which is 2 of his plays. Now, he's another, and this is, and I phrase this very carefully, because you wouldn't have wished this on them at a human level, but he is one of those writers who was gay at a time when it was illegal, and you would go to jail and you would lose your career. However...
And get beaten up.
Which I could say you would not have wished on anyone, and you would not want to have happened historically, and yet he's a very particular example of a gay writer who wrote great plays which could not be gay openly. So they're about unhappy women and unhappy men, unhappy in different ways, suppressed, frightened. So from that secrecy and fear, he produced great plays. We'll never know. It's one of the, counter histories. They're exciting, but they're in the end futile. Would he have written great gay plays had he come along later? Possibly not, and we just don't know. And I went to see I went to see The Importance of Being Earnest recently, National Theatre, and again, nobody would want this, but you can see why they threw him into jail, because he's just openly teasing and taunting the Victorian establishment at the time, with this play that is ostensibly about these 2 guys who have secrets that they have false names, and they go to the country and they have this expression bunburying, which can in certain circumstances sound like something else, this is what they do, their secret life. And again, the courage that or recklessness, you can see it as either, to write that play at a time when the establishment was coming for him. And yet, if he'd been entirely free to write anything he wanted, would he have written one of the greatest theatrical comedies of all time, in The Importance of Being Earnest? And in our own age, this becomes really interesting, because you can pretty much, particularly on Netflix, say, You can pretty much do anything you want now in art. And it's a huge question. It's a question for another day or an entire series of podcasts. But the question is whether total freedom will lead to self-indulgent art. Because, again, these restrictions, it's like the sonnet form. That 46 minutes on ITV, 58 on the BBC, which was the length of an episode. It produced some fantastic drama. Now, on Netflix, the freedom is, which is great, that if the fourth episode is naturally 36 minutes, it can be now, doesn't matter. But on the other hand, if a director decides that he or she is going to make 26 episodes of 2 hours each, they probably can, because the money is there and the space is there, because obviously the digital frame is infinite. But sometimes you can see the value of having restrictions on what. Also, money. I mean, some of the greatest TV and some of the greatest theatre was made in, not poverty in the sense that we understand at a social level, but with very, very low budgets. And you look at some stuff on any of them, all the pluses, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Netflix, Amazon. And I've been told by people who work on these things, you literally can have as much money as you want. And is it always a good thing?
One thing I would like to ask you for students or people listening to this is, do you have any advice for someone going into broadcasting?
Yeah, my advice for people going into broadcasting or journalism is work out what you want to do in it, but be aware of what is done. I mean, of what is possible. You can be revolutionary later on, but you have to be aware of what the art form allows to a beginner, is what I would say. So I teach occasionally teach journalism students, and you ask them to write a piece, and I think, well, but in what publication, digital or dead tree, could that intro appear? Because it's 480 words long, and so I get mildly grumpy with people who want to be journalists who appear never to have read an article. And I can see it's a conflict, because if you're, you don't want to do what everybody else has done, but at some level in those, you have to. And I think, and this is really difficult, and I've had it with my own children, is that the real risk for young people now, and I've talked to the journalism department here at the University of Northampton about this, the real risk is being exploited, because you can, because technically anyone can be a writer, anyone can be a broadcaster, there's a podcast,
Anyone could be a musician.
Yeah. You end up doing it for nothing, or, which is the real problem, one of the real problems in our society, you can only do it if you've got very wealthy parents. And, this is what we have to be aware of. Whatever you say about the man and the establishment, there was a filter system, which was that, and I can see the complication in who was deciding who had the talent and the kind of people they were promoting, but there was a judgment as to whether you could make a living at this, and it was quite a good filter. I'm a theatre critic, and everyone's a theatre critic. If they want to, they can just tweet what they. And I had this discussion with a group of students recently, and they said, well, why do we need theatre critics? Because anyone now can just tell you what they think. And I suppose I would say to that, that to me, a lot of citizen criticism and citizen journalism is I heart it, I hate it. Whereas we're trying, for all our faults, we're trying to put it into context, and we're... So, Yes, sorry, that was a long answer, but I think, so make sure that the fact that you are able to do it technically doesn't necessarily mean you should be doing it. But otherwise, which is what I'm mildly obsessed, very obsessed with many things, but including sport, and with very, very rare exceptions, such as an England number 3 cricketer, David Gower. In every field that I've ever explored, the people who work hardest are the most successful. And it's obviously devastating to young people when you tell them that, but it is true. Very successful people, on the whole, work very, very hard. And I'm afraid that's the advice I would give. That it won't be easy, but you've got to work hard and you've got to want it.
And don't do it for free. I agree.
I think it's really important. Don't do it for free, because otherwise you are just. And it's notorious now in the TV and theatre world that everyone you meet, really, from actors down to the production crew, they're all privately educated. They almost invariably have wealthy parents, which means they live with them in London and they're able to. And we've got to somehow address that, because it's becoming. It's not the fault of, it's nobody's fault that they went to Eton and they had this amazing drama department, but we've got to somehow find a way of equalising it, which, my children are astonished when I tell them that we got given money to go to university. But I mean, that was one of the most amazing pieces of luck of our generations, that, we got grants, and we've got to get, it's very hard to go back to that, particularly in a country short of money, at the state level, because of Liz Truss, but we've got to somehow get back to that. And then the last thing I'd say, which my advice really is but I think this is true of all creative careers, is finding the balance between being absolutely true to your own vision and listening to other people. And it's a really difficult balance because, I've had it in journalism. When you first go into journalism, I mean, if you're a slightly fancy writer, as I am, there's always, in newspapers they're called sub-editors, they try to beat it out of you. They say, "Oh well, yeah, that's a nice sentence, but what does that what does that mean? What do you want to say?" And they say, "Well, just write that then." And I think it's it's wrong that. On the other hand, which I had to learn, and everyone has to learn this, some advice is very good and useful, and you have to just get a balance between the two. I went to see a play yesterday afternoon, and the director, who I know, it's really good. It's called Second Best, and it's at the Riverside Studios and stars Asa Butterfield from Sex Education. But I saw him talking to the writer afterwards, and a director friend of his had come to the first preview. Theatre's interesting in the sense that they have previews, so you can do a lot of adjustment before you open. And a director friend came in first preview, and he said, you need to get 8-9 minutes out of this, and then you'll be fine. And he bridled, as you do, and thought, no, everything we've done is, you can't take, it will all fall apart. It will be like pulling a thread out of a sweater. It will all come apart. But then he found 8 or 9 minutes, and it worked. And that's the kind of really good technical advice that people can give. Sorry, one last story on this. My second favourite playwright, because the only interesting discussion in theatre is who the second greatest playwright is, because Shakespeare is so obviously the greatest. And then after that, you get into Sophocles, Chekhov, my own nominee for this, Henrik Ibsen, the great.
Ibsen. Yeah. Okay. Never, ever mess with Ibsen, apparently.
No.
Is that true?
Well, I certainly wouldn't, but I think that, yeah. So, but it's a very good insight, that, because Ibsen worked out really, he would not take as students playwrights who said, "Oh, I'll know when I sit down at the desk. I'll know what I'm writing." You had to do what he called a schema. You had to set out what every single character was going to say at every point before you wrote it. Now,
Opposite to you, then, in a way.
well, now I do a beat, what they call in American TV a beat sheet, which is just a list of where you're going. But actually, Ibsen was untrue to himself in the sense that he would vary from it, but he felt you had to start with that.
Okay.
But Ibsen gave the thing I remember all the time as a writer, which is he said people would tell him their theory for a play or a novel, and he would say, "Well, that's the thesis, but what's the antithesis?" And drama is more obviously the case in this because it's written in dialogue form, so you have to, A says something, B says something, sometimes C says something, but it's in constant conflict. But I've always remembered that, and sometimes you go and see these things which, and I just find them boring personally, and there are novels like this at the moment where somebody comes to England as a refugee and they're welcomed, and everyone thinks they're fantastic, and then they think England's fantastic, and it's probably not the historical or political truth at the moment. And Ibsen would say your thesis is that this person comes to England in search of a wonderful life, but what's the antithesis? And the antithesis is it may turn out not to be. This is exactly what Ibsen was saying, was that it can still work, it can still work out for the person, but it shouldn't work out in the way that they think. But I think it's true of journalism. The BBC has this statutory obligation, but it was really good for me as a writer, I think, that they have to present the other side. It can go. Sorry, this is another rabbit hole, but it can, in my view, go wrong because they end up having to always put the opposite side to everything. So that is the problem with it, and they struggle with this in editorial policy. So you have these weird, to me, weird cases this week, and you end up with these, really odd positions, I think, now, where you have lifelong pacifists saying that we should be nuking Russia or fighting this war. Yeah, because you end up in these bizarre situations where Trump is saying, and it's a clever soundbite, I just want to stop millions of people dying. If you end up on the other side of that one, then you're into some moral difficulty, I think. But people on the left do end up on the other side. People, as I say, who are pacifists, but they end up arguing for a forever war just because he wants to stop it. And I think you have to be aware of these. We all have faults and contradictions, but you have to be aware of these on the left. But yeah, the general training at the BBC, which is to always put the other side as well, is really, I just found invaluable in journalism and in fiction and drama. Because no one view should get too easy a ride in. And, even if I really like something as a critic, I always think, but what's the antithesis? What's the case against?
Yeah.
Why would someone not like this play or song or
sure.
TV series? And it's a really good discipline.
There are some people who just don't like music, and it sounds shocking.
Well,
my uncle is dead now, but and I only met him a couple of times, but he just did not like music. Because he knew I was a musician, he said something nice like, "I don't mind if it's not too loud, but as soon as it gets loud, I'm just not." But he really just didn't like music at all.
No, some people don't, and it's for all sorts of reasons. And in Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, he addresses this directly. I've heard there was this sacred chord, and then by definition, we can't assume it's Leonard Cohen, but the narrator of the song is very excited by this. But then one of his best rhymes in that, but you don't care too much for music, do you? And that was your uncle.
He was my uncle, yeah, definitely. And so I like all sorts of things, and I dislike all sorts of things as well. Yeah. But some people will only like romantic music by Strauss.
Yeah.
Maybe some Wagner. you know.
Oh, people who only like Wagner, I find very suspicious. But
Yeah.
no, and you get this all the time. People, you suggest someone goes see. Because people ask me because of what I do. They say, "What should we go and see? What should we read?" And they say, "Oh, I don't. I'd never go to see anything by Andrew Lloyd Webber."
Right.
And I just find it bonkers because there are so many. I mean, subjectively to me, there's Lloyd Webber I like, Lloyd Webber I don't like. But the idea that you would just refuse to have anything to do with any of it, because to have never seen Jesus Christ Superstar, but it was revolutionary,
it was,
at the time.
Yeah.
So to just cut yourself off from that, Cats. I mean, Cats is a thing of wonder, really. That T.S. Eliot, without ever knowing about it, ended up writing the lyrics for this. For this musical that ran for 20 years in London and on Broadway. But it's that really, that does, it always shocks me that. Or, people say, oh no, I can't be doing with theatre, or I can't be doing with novels, someone said to me once. And you think, well, you're closing off quite a large part of world culture there. Well, no, or that there will be, you would say about music, I would say about these other fields, I would be convinced there was something somewhere in that genre that person would enjoy. And they might have to try 2 or 3 of them before they got to one of them. But the idea, I don't. I mean, there are people who hate opera, aren't there? And
well, it is difficult. It's not easy.
No.
It's especially not Wagner. It's really difficult to.
You see, that's interesting because it comes from that. It comes from the idea that art should be easy.
Yeah.
And I just think it's not. Yeah, no, and we change. I mean, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I wouldn't about my top 10 Leonard Cohen tracks. I wouldn't have included Dance Me to the End of Love. And I think that's an example. I would now. It'd be very high up. And indeed, I think it's my crematorium song, I think, probably. Okay. That would be a good podcast series from the crematorium songs. Tells you a lot about people, what they choose for, what they'd like to have at the crematorium. Dance with the End of Love. And I think that's another interesting thing about art, is that I think there are some things you have to be older for. I couldn't, when I was in my 20s, I couldn't stand Jane Austen or Anita Bruckner.
No, fair enough.
I mean, you just think, I couldn't open one of these. And then, when you get older and you have more life experience, you realise what they're doing. And I don't think, there are people on the left would say that you become more conservative. I don't think so, because actually I've got more radical about what I like in theatre than, it's I wouldn't say weakness in the education system, but it's a problem in the education system that, English teachers are often teaching things to people who simply don't have the life experience to understand them. Because so much of culture is about death or the fear of death. And young people, thankfully, in most cases don't have that. They sometimes do if they've had a bereavement in the family or whatever. But
do any of us, though, really? I've recently lost my mum. Sorry, Michael. Michael recently lost his dad. But I'm not thinking about death all the time.
No.
And I know, I'm next, kind of thing.
Well, except you see, we don't get too Freudian about this.
Okay,
but,
go on.
but
you
why
are.
Not? Well, no, but you are. So, in not thinking about it, you are thinking about it. So, in going about your life and being busy and industrious, and you certainly become more so as the famous thing of smelling the flowers smell stronger and the sunset some more. That is in the end. That is about the realization that death is getting closer. I think so, and I think enjoying even. Even if Wrexham versus Northampton versus Wrexham goes as badly as I fear tomorrow, I think, when I watch football, cricket now, tennis, I have a far deeper connection with it than I would have done as a teenager in my 20s.
Yeah.
Because I think, so this is I nick all this from Freud, but so I think our sense of pleasure deepens as we get older because we know that it's receding, that it's not going to be there for. And I think, probably we work harder as well because we know time is running out.
Yeah.
I'm an age, both my parents are gone now. To what extent art prepares you for any of this? So I knew at one level from literature that no matter what age you are, it's an incredibly dislocating shock. But I still, they lived to a very good age, but I did feel, when the second one went, which was my mother, I did feel an orphan. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. This is just because I'm so old, and it's kind of, but you do. And actually, when I think back to all the poems and novels that told me that would be the case, and films, and you don't believe it until it happens. But I think, which again is a different conversation really, but I think that's one of the other defenses of art, is that I think art is a series of instructions. Not entirely how to live your life, because it's not polemical. Some of it is polemical in that way. But I think if you read a novel or a poem or go to see a play, an opera, listen to a song, it's a kind of life lesson, I think, if it's any good. And I'll tell one more story about this. When on the day my mother died, I was due to, and we knew she was going to die, but I was due to review theatre that night. And all my family, my colleagues said, "They were so stupid, you just, go later in the week." And I, which is very Greek, ancient Greek of me, I thought, no, I'm going to, rather than sit at home drinking red wine, watching pointless, I'll go to the theatre. And I had a quite shocking moment early on, because I'd come from a hospital bed where a Catholic priest had given the last sacrament, as Catholics call it, to my mother. And this was the opening scene of the play that I went to see. Couldn't have known that. And my first instinct was just get out of this theatre. And then I thought, no, I'll stay, because the Greeks told us that art is cathartic. And actually seeing that play did help me. There's no doubt about that. And I've always remembered that, because I think that's... and, the famous... Those of us who are obsessed with Leonard Cohen, our families say, "Oh, how can you listen to that stuff? It's so depressing." But it isn't.
No, not at all.
No. It's uplifting.
It's the opposite.
And King Lear, Shakespeare, is a great example of this. It's deeply, deeply pessimistic, depressed, bleak play. And yet if you see a great production of that, you come out exhilarated. And that's what the Greeks were onto. There's something about putting yourself through that. They're sort of thought experiments, aren't they? That you, and so, and this gets on to another of my obsessions, which is trigger warnings. So, do
we need to put one in here?
our culture now would say the last thing you should possibly do on the day your mother dies is go and see a play about an elderly Catholic who's died. And I seriously question that. I don't think it's the first thing you should do. I don't think it would work for all people. But I think the idea that you absolutely should not do it is wrong. And I think, and I've known, we all do when we get to a certain age, I've known people had terrible, terrible tragedies in their families, the loss of children and so on. And you understand why you do as parents, but they would try to protect their children from ever seeing any film or television program that touched in any way on the death of a younger sibling. And you understand why you do that. But actually, they found later on that they were seeking out films and books about this and music.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something, it's very complicated, and I'm not suggesting, don't do this without doctors and therapists involved. But I think that is something that art does. And I think, we've all done it. I mean, after, it's the famous breakup thing, isn't it? That you listen to these these incredibly gloomy songs about breakups, but it's what you need to do. And actually, if you listen to Happy Days Are Here Again, it wouldn't do anything for you. You'd just think, really? I mean, of course they're not. So I think there's something very, which I haven't got, I will never get to the answer about this, but there's something very deep about art there and what it does for us.
I remember when I first watched your Noel Gallagher interview, I thought he'd got quite tetchy with you, but then I watched it again and he didn't really. So I don't know why I thought that. But do people ever get? I think someone walked out on you. Wasn't
7?
It?
Yeah, I've lost.
Oh, you've had people walk out on you.
I've lost 7 in various circumstances. Jeffrey Archer, Sir Alex Ferguson. And there are people who see this as as a failure of the interviewer. I don't actually, because they all walked out because I'd asked about something that they didn't want to be asked about. I mean, it's interesting. You see, Noel Gallagher, it also happened with Phil Collins, and it's a particular thing in the music business, that in both those cases, their people had appeared in my dressing room and said, you can't ask about this, you can't ask about Liam, you can't ask about. So, I mean, the Phil Collins was mind-blowing to me, because his people turned up in my dressing room and they said, okay, so you can't ask about anything personal. And then they gave me a long list of professional things I couldn't talk about. And I said, well, we're about to record 2 hours of this. I mean, what am I going to ask him about if I can't do any of this? But then, and this is greatly to his credit, I haven't always loved all of his music and still don't, but Phil Collins then appeared in my dressing room as we had adjoining dressing rooms. Because one of my things was not to, which is again a piece of broad advice I give to interviewers, don't meet the person beforehand, because you talk out the stuff. So I never met them before. But anyway, Phil Collins suddenly appeared, and I thought, oh no, I've broken my golden rule of not talking to the person before. And he said, have you had my lot in here? And I said, yeah. And he said, what did they say? So I told him, and he said, just ignore all that. Just ask me whatever you want to. And I thought that was greatly to his credit.
Because I just watched that interview, Rick, and you start off by asking him about tax, basically. And you pin him on the ropes quite a while about that, and he's quite defensive to start with. I like that interview because he's quite closed to start with, and he's aware he's being interviewed. But I think at the end he just forgets.
Yes, now that's really interesting inside that, because we always recorded at least 2 hours, sometimes more, and we got the longest TV tapes you could possibly get. Because one of the things I discovered early on doing those TV interviews is that it's always just as someone says, and that's when I killed my mother, that someone shouts tape change. And then you put the new tape in and you say, right, so you've just admitted to killing your mother. And say, no, I haven't. No. And so you just went for the longest possible tapes you could get. But yeah, and it was based on, again, because I was brought up a Catholic, it was based on the confessional. The idea was that, so it's quite dark and we're very close together, and the crew were quite a long way back. And so the idea was that you should indeed stop thinking that you're doing a TV interview. And that's when the really interesting stuff happens. Because before that, having done interviews for TV and radio, in general, radio interviews would always be more revealing, long-form radio interviews. And it was because it was just the two of you in a studio. The technicians were on the other side of the glass, and there was that forgetting that. So that was what you were aiming for. I think. I think possibly because obviously for the Gallaghers, talking about the other brother was really difficult, and so I think there might be a moment of. But starting on the tax. I mean, that's just my thing because I'm a journalist by training, and I just you have to do the In the Air Tonight, how did you write that and all that kind of, and what's it like with, drumming for so long. But my rule was just don't do that first. Because I think for both which seems to have worked on you, which is great, for both the interviewee and the viewer, they should think, ooh, this is interesting. We're not getting, when did you have the idea for In the Air Tonight? And you will, and I think it's important that you do, but you shouldn't do it first. And again, we're giving advice to people here, but a lot of interviews are done at what's called junkets. Anyone who's seen Notting Hill, Hugh Grant turns up at when Julia Roberts is at one of these junkets in a hotel where it's interviewer after interviewer after interviewer. One of my interviews with Terry Gilliam, I was his 38th interview of the day, and 36 of them had been translated into Japanese. And he was barely alive by the time I got to him. And so in those circumstances, if you say, why did you always want to make a film about Don Quixote? You're not going to get anything because they've done it all day. So just try to ask something else. So I think the opening question, it's a big deal, the opening question. And I with the actually most of them, but I would write them out as a play, basically. I would sit for sometimes 2 days, and I would write my question and what I thought their answer would be, and then where I'd go next, and then if they said that, I'd go to. And my poor children used to have to play these people sometimes, so that and then sometimes I'd be them, and they had to ask me the questions. So, I mean, John le Carré, who is a great literary hero of mine, I spent days preparing for that, and you know what they've said to other people, so you want to try to get beyond that. So it was. And I do write plays, so it was, I would end up with these pages and pages of, I say this, they say that. And then when you go into the interview, I wasn't trying to recreate that. I just knew that it just meant I knew the material. And that if they said something, I would instinctively, I think, no, well, then I go to this.
You're very hard working, very prepared then.
Yeah, that's what I hope. Yeah.
Yeah. So with both interviews with Phil Collins and with Noel Gallagher, before those interviews, I wasn't especially keen on those artists, but I think both of them, especially Phil Collins, because to me Phil Collins was a fairly sort of bland artist. He's suddenly much more interesting, and I'm suddenly much more interested in his music, and he came across quite well. Obviously, quite a flawed character.
Yeah, well,
we all
are.
Yeah. But I liked him a lot more after that.
Well, that's my other thing is that most, people ask me about this, but I just, most people are more interesting than you think they are. Apart from 6 people who I won't name, who are much less interesting than you.
Could you name all the others around?
Than you think they are. But in general, that's true. And I'm very shy by nature, and it's not a problem professionally, but in like social things. And I've learned that most people are really quite interesting. But again, which is a lesson for interviewing, I think, you have to get beyond the superficial level. I mean, most people are really interesting on. I mean, obviously, if they're lucky enough to have a job and a profession, but most people are really interesting on their profession, because you're at a wedding and you meet a taxidermist or a vet or whatever. It's really interesting to me what it's like to do that all day, and what are they. And that's what I tried to apply. I mean, when I started as an interviewer, the producers would say, "Are you a massive fan of so and so?" And I say, "Well, it's completely irrelevant. I mean, I just, can we get is there an interesting interview about this person?" And I think that's, a general lesson in life as well.
Mm-hmm. So you've become less conservative and more radical. So I think I've detected some hints that you're going to become more radical. Is your best work now ahead of you?
Well, who knows? I mean, you never know. I mean, I just, I write things these days that I think are better than other stuff I've done, but you just never know. No. But I think, which I think is true of most people, I just think generally I've become more relaxed about it all. And you care less, I think, about what people think and whether you should or shouldn't do. I mean, the novel I'm writing at the moment is it's an extremely eccentric project, but I'm really enjoying it. And then you just have to have the confidence that other people might. And it's really hard, but I think that's good. I mean, I'm finding it really difficult, but that I think is a good thing.
Okay, right. You can give us any clue about the novel, was it? Or not? Would that jinx it?
It might jinx it, but it's about a particular sporting event in history. 44 years.
66 World Cup?
No.
Okay.
Too many people have done that.
Okay.
As we speak, 44 years ago, so it was in the 80s, early 80s. And I've always been, I watched it at the time, and I've always been slightly obsessed with it. And then I was reading some books recently. There are a lot of non-fiction books about it. And I never really put it together that all the major participants in that sporting event, none of them was, even days before it, none of them was supposed to play in that game. One had been dropped, one was injured. Well, two of them had been dropped, actually. And I just thought, because, I think we're all obsessed with this, but certainly I always have been in what I write. What we now call, they wouldn't have called then because the film hadn't come out, sliding doors moments. And the people, and it comes from covering politics as well. That I've watched these people who thought they were going to be president or prime minister, and then suddenly they're not, and it's quite, it's a very powerful thing dramatically to me. Contingency, it's known as, and I think this book is about that. Is that, and for jinxing reasons, I'm not going to say what it is, people who, one of the greatest sporting achievements of all time, the people involved in it were not expected to even play. And so but I've got to make it, well, I think I've made it work now. Because we live for 9 years now, getting on for a decade. We've lived out a series of sliding doors moments, of which Brexit is obviously a huge one. And, these are relatively tiny margins that result in these things. And so I think with Brexit and with the 2 Trump presidencies and the, 4 or 5 Conservative prime ministers in a row, I think we're living through a period in which we're unusually aware of what the alternative might have been. And even, and I think as a liberal, you have to be careful not to think that the alternative would always have been better. It's more interesting. It's more interesting to me. Why did all these people vote for Brexit? Why do all these people vote for Trump? That's the question. You can't just. There's a tendency on the left to just want to sack the electorate and say we'll get a better electorate next time round. Believe me, the really interesting question is why this stuff has happened. I mean, there's a play called The Absence of War by David Hare, and it's about for younger viewers, a Neil Kinnock figure, a reformist Labour leader, fictional in this, who loses the election to the Tories, which is what happened to Neil Kinnock.
Yeah.
And in the final scene, there's a speech that has always haunted me, and which I actually use as one of the epigraphs to this book, novel I'm writing. At the end, the defeated Labour leader says, he's at the cenotaph, because he's still leader of the opposition, and he lays the wreath. And then he turns to the audience and he says, in the months since my defeat, I've been haunted by this thought. Is this history? Is everything just history? Or could we have done more? Yeah, fate, destiny, some people say...
Was it always going to happen?
Well, this is the question. And again, I would say particularly to... younger people, including my children, don't, you can get angry to a certain extent about the fact that Trump has won, but it's much more interesting to ask why he did. And, that's where the interest for journalism and fiction and culture is.
If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe, and don't be shy to leave a comment too. Thank you so much for listening.